Welcome to In Our Generation, January 12th, 2021. We've been away for a while. I've been very busy, but got a little bit of time. Talk a little bit about the news. Lots of news going on. Very, very important things happening in the world today. I think there are things that are going to affect us drastically. Um, Number one thing that I think is likely to affect you and affect you for a very long time is Parler being shut down. Whether you are a Parler user, whether you parlay or not, this is likely to affect you. This is a shot across the bow of what is going to be possible, what they call big tech is empowered to do. Along with Parler being shut down, of course, you have to add that Donald Trump's Twitter and all other online accounts have been closed, have been suspended, they call it. They have been terminated with prejudice. Even the POTUS Twitter account, though the official president of the United States, Twitter account has been suspended until Biden takes office. Both of these things are going to have a dramatic effect on our lives and our digital lives, which are becoming our only lives. If you extract the digital life from your life, you're not going to have much of what you think of as life left. I know some of you might resist at hearing that and think that that isn't the case, but when you consider that you're talking about all forms of banking, online banking, getting your check direct deposited, even being able to go to a bank with a physical paper check and cash it and being allowed to do so, all of that is now under fire of whether or not tech companies and banking companies and financial service companies are able to exclude somebody because they don't like their opinions or they don't like their behavior. This is going to be very interesting coming forward, and it doesn't bode well for a lot of people. Now, I want to be clear that there is two sides to this whole issue, and then we can see that in the Parler issue, but it's in the entire thing. So a lot of people on the right are painting this as being an attack against freedom of speech, that Twitter, Apple, not Twitter directly in this case, but Apple, Google, that have removed the apps from their app stores, and then Amazon, which canceled their contract, their hosting contract. They terminated the contract. All of this, and then, of course, most other hosting services will not work with Parler either. Microsoft won't, Google won't, and those are the three largest hosting service providers. So the right wants to paint this as them attacking free speech. Now, that is not exactly the case. So if you look into this a little bit, you can see that Amazon and Apple and Google certainly had legitimate reasons for not wanting to host or to participate in Parler's business model. Parler's business model is, or was, if you want to think of it that way, because they may be completely done with. But Parler's business model is that they don't actively censor or actively police their users. So if something is brought to their attention and it violates their terms of service, which Parler does have terms of service, and you're not permitted to say anything you want to say on there. You cannot come out and incite violence or whatever. That's in their terms of service. So if you violate their terms of service, then they will whatever, they'll deal with that, up to including terminating your Parler account, not allowing you to post anymore. But what they don't do is they say they don't patrol all the conversations actively. They wait for it to be brought to their attention and then they deal with it. It's kind of their business model. And because of that, you have a lot of posts that are put up on Parler that aren't proper. And so Amazon looks at this partly as a liability issue, that what if they are held accountable for what Parler is, or even as a moral issue that they are contributing to any violence that may result from it, or contributing to Parler being used to organize, or people being using Parler to organize things like the raid on the Capitol, or Antifa, or anyone else for that matter, white supremacists marching or burning down Jewish buildings, or black-owned businesses, or whatever might happen. They don't want to have anything to do with that. So that's Amazon's side of the perspective on this. And it's not about whether or not you have the freedom of speech, it's whether or not you're going to have a service that facilitates, basically allows for, even if it's a small number of people, but facilitates and allows, empowers that small number of people to organize in a way at a much larger scale than would normally be possible for a human being, which is what social media sites allow to happen. For whatever reason, extremists tend to rise to the top on those, primarily because they're saying things that very few other people are saying. And when you go to these, you're generally looking to hear something that is different than anyone else. That's why it stands out. You're looking for something that stands out. So extremism tends to float to the top of all of these sites. And then that allows people who, under normal human conditions, normal human interactions, would not have much of a following, generally speaking. In social media, extremists end up being able to put together quite a large following, and so Amazon is reacting to that, as well as Apple, as well as Google. Now, does Parler have a point that it's more than just that? And yes, they absolutely have a point, because as everyone has pointed out ad nauseum, all of these companies deal with people who are engaging in very similar behavior as what can be found on Parler, or their users engage in very similar behavior, and yet you don't see the same reaction to it. So when they're extreme leftist types who are advocating hanging Mike Pence, or burning down unwoke businesses, or whatever it is they might advocate on these other sites, mainstream sites, you don't see the same hand-wringing and worry about liability. They seem to just be willing to go along with it. So that's Parler's argument, right? That Twitter has violent speech on it also. They have very notable or very famous people holding up the severed head of the U.S. president, or whatever they might have. This is all happening on these other sites. And so Parler's argument is, what about that? And why isn't there consistency? So it's true that it goes with what appears to be their worldview of Amazon and Microsoft and all these companies that have gone very woke. It seems to be to accommodate their worldview, to shut down a place where you have a very large number of right-wing people commenting on or participating in. So shutting that down certainly doesn't hurt their worldview whatsoever. Not only that, but Parler has sued Amazon Web Services in the Western District Court because they allege that Amazon has violated their contract, meaning that Parler had a contract with Amazon, and that contract stipulated that you couldn't terminate service without 30 days notice. Amazon gave them, I think, 1 day notice, maybe 2-day notice, if I remember right. Very little time. And of course, that isn't nearly enough time to transition a site the size of Parler over to new web servers. And so they are suing them for breach of contract and going to try to get quite a bit of money out of them by doing so. Whether that'll go anywhere, that's going to languish in courts for years and years. And eventually Parler's probably just going to run out of money to pursue it because Amazon has very deep pockets and probably has a whole building full of lawyers who are expert at just dragging it out and bleeding the plaintiff dry. But that's what Parler is alleging. I read through their filing, their court filing, where they sue, where they're filing suit against Amazon, and their argument, in which I think they have a point, that just because Amazon thinks they've violated their terms of service, the fact that they only have notified them within recent days and not given them sufficient time. In fact, the contract stipulates they have 30 days to address whatever concerns might be brought forward. So it seems like Amazon jumped the gun on this and did this instead of giving them 30 days. So this is not about just not wanting liability. This was also very much wanting to get rid of that. Now, what Amazon does point out, which is interesting, what Parler points out about Amazon, which I found interesting in the filing, is that Amazon Web Services just signed a contract with Twitter to host a bunch of Twitter's traffic on their web service. So it certainly does also bring in the idea of a conflict of interest there. So all of that's interesting. Now, all that is to say that this is a very complex and nuanced issue. And the idea that this is simply an attack on freedom of speech, or it's simply Amazon simply trying not to have liability in case of some type of violence, all of that is to oversimplify the issue. But what should concern us greatly is that it appears that we have made these tech companies more powerful than any other entity in our lives. Tech companies are more powerful than the government. They're more powerful than the U.S. president, at least one who's outgoing, although that is a little bit, has to be nuanced a little bit, because a president in his last few days really doesn't have a whole lot of power. There's not much they can do, pretty much, because everything has to be done legally, and you can't send out like a hit squad to go do something. That doesn't work in a proper republic. You'd have to go through legal channels, and that just takes forever. And if you're leaving office within 200 hours, I think is the count now. There's a Drudge is actually counting it down by the hour, which is funny. Well, if you only have 2 hours left, there's only so much you're going to be able to do, and so they know they can just grit their teeth and hold on to the end, which is, I think, why they waited as long as they did. It was very strategic of why they did that. But all nuance aside, tech companies are able to silence anyone they want completely, because they not only control the largest amount of software that we use, such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, all of these are all there's other sites, but they're nothing. Nobody goes there. That's why everyone was posting on Facebook that they were on Parler, because nobody's on Parler. I know. They have millions of users, right? They have millions of accounts. There's a difference between millions of accounts and millions of actual engaged users. And that's why everybody's on Facebook telling everyone that they're on Parler. Virtue signaling from the right. So they not only control the software elements of our life, they control the actual, at least the link up to the backbone, which is the internet's the backbone. But the link to that, how do you get on the internet? Let's say you say, well, I don't like Twitter. I'm going to make my own Twitter. Well, you have to host it somewhere. And as soon as they find out that you are allowing people that they want banned from public speech, from the public sphere, as soon as they find out you're allowing them on, they're just going to cancel your hosting account. And even if you think you're with some little independent hoster, most of them are just reselling hosting from the big companies, which means they all fall under the same rules. And if you actually do start to grab any amount of momentum, you will attract their attention, and they have the power to just simply say you are not going to be online. Amazon not only pulled, and this is part of the complaint that Parler has in their filing, Amazon not only terminated their contract with web services, but they leaked it to BuzzFeed hours before they even notified Parler, so that the entire tech community was aware that Amazon deemed them high risk. This would be like if your car insurance company called every car insurance company in the state and told them, we're not telling you what to do, we're just saying they're very high risk. And if you have the largest insurance company, the most well-respected insurance company, telling everybody they're high risk, we cannot in good conscience associate with them, well, you're just basically just shutting every door to them. Nobody is going to open their doors to them, not even people sympathetic with their mission, because they think surely Amazon, with its reach and with its grasp, right, with all the resources that it has at hand, surely they know something I don't know. And is it really that important for me to dig in? Do I really want that fight? Is the little bit of money I might make off of this deal worth it? And I think many of them simply decided no, because Parler is finding it very, very hard to find a host, and it is very expensive to set up your own. Parler is not a company that you're going to run off of a spare PC in your closet. Those days are long gone. These things are being run off of server farms, and so that's extraordinarily expensive to set up. They were never in any way capable of doing that. They'd never had the kind of funding needed to do such a thing, and so we'll see what happens. But my guess is Parler is dead. There's no more Parler for you, as if any of us were even hardly using it anyway. There are other sites, but my guess is that they are all been served notice. They have all these non-Facebook, Twitter, Google companies should right now be aware that time is probably ticking for them. And if these companies can shut down both their political competition, their worldview competition, and at the same time their business competition, and it's a win-win-win, I suspect we're going to see a lot more of this happening, but we'll find out. All right, so that's the news. And the other thing I was going to tell you about that is they not only control the access to the internet through the web services, they control the software. You have to remember, they also control all the devices. Most people today are using devices in order to connect to these services and to the internet and to obtain their information. They're not using old school computers very much at all. Most people don't even have a computer. All they have is a phone, maybe a tablet, and those are highly controlled by the companies that make them. So Apple has complete control over the apps you put on your phone, complete control. Many people don't realize this, but they not only can prohibit apps from appearing on the App Store, which means you cannot load them on an iPhone, at least not any normal person. A few people in the world can, but not very normal people. If it's not on the App Store, you can't put it on your device. But they not only control who can publish on the App Store, Apple controls what you actually have on your phone. Now, they don't generally do this, but they are able to. In fact, we know that because they did it, and they got into some trouble a while back. But they can just simply delete apps off your phone anytime they want. Off your personal phone, they can just delete them anytime they want, and you don't have them anymore. They have a kill switch in there. I know they don't call it that. I'm sure it's not a big red button that says kill switch that, Tim Cook pushes, but they do. They have a mechanism for deleting apps off your phone if they deem it necessary. So they control all of this. You are completely at their mercy, and we've handed them the keys to that kingdom. We have made them this important, and we've gotten benefit out of it. So, we can't cry. No crying allowed, right? We get to use YouTube and upload videos for free, which should cost us thousands and thousands of dollars a month to be able to do this, like what I'm doing here, make it completely impossible for someone like me to do such a thing. So we get tremendous benefit, and we pay a tremendous cost in a different form of currency. So that's where we're at. But it'll be very interesting. I suspect that we are going to find that this is one of the most eventful things that has happened in a very long time. It is, I'm assuming, opening the doors to tech being much more emboldened and empowered to be the ethics police, the morality police, the woke police, however you think, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, you think that it is. They're going to start being the actual police. They are going to be able to have the power. What the government could not do, they are going to have the power to force other companies to comply. And we're going to have a huge homogeny of companies that all enforce the exact same rules, because if they don't, they just simply won't exist. And that's probably what the next few years looks like. And I don't see much being able to change that. I don't think the Democrats have any ambition to break these companies apart. I think that these companies are pretty stoked about Biden being president, the Democrats being in power. I think the Democrats see them as being able to implement the social engineering that they have tried politically to do for years and not been able to do. And because in order for them to do it politically, they had to do it by force. They actually had to send out police and with guns and force to kill people physically to get them to comply with their social engineering ideas. Whereas tech can do this without physical force. They use digital force. And if you've ever been around people who are really into technology, if you offered them a choice between dying physically and dying digitally, they'd have to think about it. They'd have to really think about it. They're not. It's like, give me your kid or give me your iPhone. And they'd have to ponder. That would be a difficult choice to make. So, yeah, this is going to be very, very interesting to see where this leads. But I predict that we are going to see that tech becomes the guardians of whatever they consider to be correct and right and good. And they are going to become the new God. And their word is going to be the new commandments. And their punishment is going to be digital death, which means you aren't going to get a job. You're not going to be able to do banking. I mean, it could get very interesting. So we'll see what happens there. All right, moving on to this portion that I like to call "Don't Ever Doubt Me, I Was Right." The Toronto Sun. Sorry there. The Toronto Sun published an article. Here it is. I got it up on the screen for you. Where a doctor by the name of Dr. Ari Jaffe, I assume that's how you pronounce it, who was a specialist in pediatric infectious diseases at Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, Canada. He published, he did an interview with the Toronto Sun where he states that the lockdowns are 10 times more expensive, more deadly, more problematic than the disease that they're trying to stop. I think that's what he said, 10 times. It says the cost of the lockdowns 10 times. I think it's, you have to read the article, but I lost it here. But I think he says it's 10 times that of the disease they're trying to prevent. And he goes through all the things. Of course, he actually has a degree and he's an expert in a lot of these issues, and he's looked into it with actual data. I was simply speaking intuitively, but my comments at the beginning my comments at the beginning of this entire lockdown, in fact, me and other people, I got people very angry at me because I opposed the lockdowns from the very start. And the reason isn't because didn't think the disease could actually hurt anyone or anyone would die from it. I was willing to accept the official figures of there being millions of deaths as being a distinct possibility. The idea that a pandemic could sweep across the country and across the world and kill millions and millions of people is very possible and even maybe likely. So it's not that I doubted the contagiousness or the fatality of the disease or the virus. It's that that is unknown. Whereas what we do know is what is the cost and what is the fatality of locking down the economy, and that the unintended consequences of that, while they may be unknown in detail, in broad scope, we know exactly what's going to come out of that. Economists could have told you very accurately how many people were going to starve to death, how many people were going to die of other diseases as a result of the lockdown measures. And so all of those things were why I said from the very beginning, this is a very bad idea. Now we are starting to get confirmation from people who actually have the expertise and the access to look into this more carefully. And those that are looking into it, many of them are now opposing lockdowns as being a proper measure to constrain this problem. They're not suggesting that there is no problem. They absolutely accept it. They understand that many people are dying from this. It's a terrible thing. It's horrible for anyone who suffers from it, anyone who has a family member who's died from it. All of that is true. And yet it's also true that the lockdowns have resulted in terrible amount of destruction, not only financial destruction, but you have to remember that financial destruction is simply a way of measuring all forms of destruction, including health and life. And so there's this article in the Toronto Sun. I encourage you to take a look at that and read it. It's very interesting. He goes through and explains his reasoning on all that. All right. What else? Oh, yes. So we have a grocery store called named Giant Foods, which I think they serve mainly Virginia and Maryland, who are now putting these labels on their products, labeling which products come from companies that are Black owned. Now, I know some people are up in arms about this. So long as the government doesn't mandate that companies must do this, I don't care one way or the other. That's perfectly fine. If Giant Foods services a demographic that this would be helpful to them, this type of information, well, that's fine. I know some people think this is terrible. I don't think it's terrible, but I do think it's interesting. It's interesting because this to me speaks of the silliness of the idea of systemic racism in America. I have a hard time accepting the notion of systemic racism if it is beneficial for a minority owned company to label their products as being minority owned. If there's such widespread and terrible systemic racism, and whites are at least 60% of the consumers of most stores, and they're all systemically racist, or many of them are, I don't know that minorities would want to advertise that they own the company you're buying from. If you go back and look at it historically of what systemic racism and what racism looks like, overt and systemic racism looks like in societies where you can actually prove it exists, one of the evidences is that those who are being discriminated against do not advertise that they own the company you're buying from. In fact, it's very common for Jewish lawyers back in the days of actual racism against Jews to get an Irishman to be a partner so that they could have an Irish name on their law firm because they didn't want to advertise that it was a Jewish-owned law firm or Jewish-owned bank. I'm not saying everyone did that, but that wasn't uncommon. It wasn't uncommon for minorities who were lighter complected to pass themselves off as being white and live their whole life completely disassociate from their darker skinned family so that they could pretend, put on the appearance that they were not minorities because it was a detriment to them to be so under actual racism and discrimination. That's horrible, I know, but there's just history's full of these examples. At least it was until big tech has decided to basically censor all that information. But it does happen, and there are plenty of documented cases of this. But the fact that now it is a huge benefit to a company to be minority owned, I mean, it's an enormous benefit. In fact, here in Texas, construction companies generally will figure out a way to make the owner of the company a minority. If they can be a minority and a woman on top of that, that gives them tremendous advantage in the workplace, in the marketplace. Many of the companies that I work for are considered minority owned because they have a daughter-in-law or a wife or somebody they married who is either African American or Mexican American or some other minority group that is privileged under Texas and federal business laws. And they advertise them being minority owned. It's a huge plus. You get put to the top of the stack in bidding proposals if you're minority owned. Every time I submit a bid for my construction company, one of the first things I have to answer is, am I minority owned? And if I would have put the name of my business, if I would register it under my wife's name, who is Hispanic, or under my kids who are Mexicans, well, then I could say I was minority owned and it'd actually be very beneficial for me. Well, I find that very difficult to square with the notion of widespread racism. Where's all this widespread racism at? It's so subtle and so tiny that you're better off labeling your products as being black owned as opposed to white owned. Not sure that speaks to the reality of systemic racism. I think it speaks to the reality that we are long past all of that. On the live chat, user asks, what about examples like Idaho? Should people start calling the internet provider to block Facebook and Twitter? First off, that is such any of these type of things, type of attempts are so minor. They really are. I mean, Facebook and Twitter are worldwide companies, and if the entire state of Idaho blocked them, it wouldn't hardly mean anything to them. And that's if the entire state did it. So just on that level, it's these things where people think they have a lot more power than they really do, and they really don't have a lot of power. It's like people that decide they're not going to use Amazon, which you can perfectly do. You should, if you don't like Amazon, you should shop at Walmart.com. They bought Jet.com, and so they have a online. In fact, I used to buy a lot from Jet.com because they had things really cheap because they were trying to lure users away from Amazon. Not sure how it worked for them, but I bought a lot of stuff from them. So there's, you can do that. Like I personally have gotten off of Dropbox and Google Drive, and I've set up my own cloud for my own files. And I'm looking at setting up my own social media in which I'll be the only user, and I will post to myself, and then I will contradict myself. And then so I want to set up my own social media, and I have my own cloud, and I like to do all these things all on my own. So there are ways to do it. Is that going to does anyone care at all if I go through with all these things? No. Dropbox doesn't care one bit whether I'm with them or not, and neither does Facebook or Twitter or anyone else. and you can't get enough people in the country to boycott them to make enough of a difference in the long run, because they are global companies and they are more interested in growth in China than they are in growth in America, because they've kind of tapped out in America. That's why they're going to the emerging markets. All right, here's an interesting bit of news that I looked at. So scientists are starting to get concerned about giraffes, because apparently giraffes are starting to shrink, and they found midget giraffes. Now, don't come at me for using politically incorrect terms. That's what they call them. Now, why they can get away with calling giraffes midgets, and why there's not an outcry, why PETA has not raised an outcry for this, for insensitive words, hate speech towards giraffes, I don't know. But apparently these giraffes that they're finding, the giraffes are supposed to be about 15 to 20 feet tall, and they're finding ones that are about 9 feet tall, which, if you're 9 foot tall and you're the runt, that tells you something about your family. But you got these, and what's funny about these giraffes is their necks are the same length as the big giraffes. They just have short legs. Makes it real hard to buy pants when you have the body of a 20-footer, but the legs of a 9-footer. So they have these tiny, fat, muscular legs. If you've seen giraffes, they got these long stick-like legs. You wonder how they could even walk on them. Well, they got these little midget giraffes that have the whole body is basically the same size as a full-size giraffe, but their legs are short and muscular. Very interesting. I think that's hilarious. These little giraffes running around. Midget giraffes, dwarf giraffes. Anyways, what's funny to me about the whole thing is that they say, as just a matter of fact, that giraffes have grown taller in order to reach taller leaves. I think there's a lot of silly things that the right or that the conservative Christians try to accuse evolutionists of, and I think they get out of their depth. We get out of our depths a lot when we try to debate or argue against evolution. But one thing that evolutionists constantly say that, as far as I can tell, is just complete nonsense, is that anything developed genetically because of its conditions. Meaning, giraffes wanted to reach the taller leaves, and so they grew taller. Well, I've been wanting to dunk the basketball my entire life. Do you think that NBA players that are 7 foot tall is because they wanted to dunk more than I did? Maybe that's what they mean when they say the winning team just wanted it more, right? They wanted it more. They grew taller while they were trying. They grew faster, right? They genetically morphed and had more muscles because they wanted it more. Don't you think all the animals want the leaves at the top of the tree where there actually are leaves, where they're not all plucked dry by the other animals? Don't you think elephants would like those leaves? Don't you think, little bears would like those leaves? How is it that an explanation? That is it's the dumbest thing, and yet they say it as just a matter of fact. It's just one of those statements that are made that are completely meaningless and completely ridiculous, and yet it's said as if it's actual real science. That is junk science of any sort. There may be genetic changes that happen within living organisms because of environmental pressures. But to say that giraffes grew taller because they wanted leaves that were higher up on the tree, well, why haven't they grown even taller? Because giraffes can only reach about 20 feet high, and there are trees that are taller than 20. Why are they getting shorter? Do these short giraffes just want grass now? They want to be closer to the grass. They wanted to be able to run faster. I mean, what did they want? What did the dwarf want? And why then are scientists concerned and not respecting the choice of dwarf giraffes, of midget giraffes. Seems to me they're not respecting that they identify as being short, or maybe the short ones identify as tall. It's hard to say. Anyways, that was interesting. Oh, another thing that I found interesting in science was and I mentioned this on the podcast, but here's a little graphic of it. Popular Mechanics reports that scientists have discovered that the radio waves that we are emitting, mainly low frequency, which is primarily used by the military, and then AM radio would be low frequency. And when you get to FM, you're starting to get into high frequency, and Wi-Fi and others are very high. But all our radio waves, but particularly low frequency radio waves, are actually pushing back. And that's what you see in the blue of this little diagram. They are pushing back the sun's radiation, and that's the red you see. The sun's radiation predominantly affects the equator and going outward. That's just how it works. But what they found a barrier that was limiting the amount of the sun's radiation that was making it to the planet. And as they investigated that, they found out that what is causing that is a man-made obstacle or barrier. So in all the hoopla over mankind ruining the planet with anthropogenic climate change and other things, here we have a very good example, that we have also the power to make things better. And it is definitely making the planet better that the radiation isn't hitting us nearly as hard as it would if it weren't for our devices. And so if you only have one cell phone, you probably need to buy another one to do your part in saving the planet. I have 2 cell phones, and so I am more virtuous than you are. And in fact, I'm going to signal my virtue right now. See here, I'm going to signal my virtue right here. And I have another cell phone, and I got Wi-Fi everywhere, and I got many routers in my house. So I'm a very virtuous person, and I love the planet, and I am saving the world. I am saving the world. I don't know what you did today and what you're planning on doing tomorrow, but my plan is to save the world. So you can thank me later. All right, let's do one more thing of news, and then we will end for today. There is, as many of you know, I am quite a fan of Apple products. I own stock in the company. I like their products very much. I love their operating system. I don't like their politics. I don't like their political culture in their company, their social culture, but I love their products. And so I found this interesting. Apple has put out these new headphones called the AirPods Max. They sell for about, if I remember right, about $600. No, I do not own a pair. I don't have any plans on owning a pair of our AirPods Max or any other form of AirPods. This is not one of the products I buy. Anyways, for those of you who are thinking about buying them, you might want to consider that they seem to have a serious problem. So they have made them out of aluminum as opposed to plastic. Most other earphones, especially these big ones that go over your ears, are made out of plastic. And Apple's thing is this high quality, luxury feel, luxury design of their products. And their look is that they make everything out of aluminum now. And also because, they like to say it's because it's recyclable. I don't think that's really the issue, but that's what they like to say. Anyways, the problem with these is that because of the heat in your head, if you wear them for a long period of time, and the metal transmits the cool from the air, aluminum is a very good conductor of heat, and so the metal is cool, your head is hot, warm, and it causes condensation inside the microphones. And that condensation even gets down into the drivers of these not microphones, these headphones. And so a lot of people are having problems when they wear them for an hour or 2 hours. They take off the little cups that are stick on with magnets, like most of Apple stuff does, and they find that they are full of condensation in there. So if you're thinking of buying a $600 pair of headphones from Apple, you might want to think of how hot your head is. And a lot of that depends on how much hot air is coming out, I would imagine. So you probably would like to maybe put a little thermometer in front of your mouth while you're talking. If you find the temperature rises significantly, then maybe these are not for you. All right. Well, that is the news for today. This is In Our Generation, January 12th of 2021, and we will see you next time. Take care.